Well, more and more people are working into their late 60s and 70s. And as you do that, you should have RMDs that maybe you're putting off. And when that time comes and you've been saving so much money, are you worried about the massive tax bill that could come with those RMDs? Today, we're going to break it down a little bit and talk about this scenario of people working into their 70s, still saving money and preparing for that RMD when it's time. There's a lot to think about. We'll give you a couple options today. Welcome into Perfect Game Retirement. Ben George with Ryan Ledden at Black Oak Asset Management. So let me ask you, I'm going to set up this conversation with the question itself, Ryan, because we're going to work through this scenario today. We got a great question from Paul, and I want to lay it out first so you can see it. You can read along with it if you're watching on YouTube, and then we'll start breaking it down. So here's the scenario, Ryan. I'm 74 years old and still working, making about $150,000 a year. I have over $1 million in my 401k, which I haven't started taking distributions from since I'm still working and contributing to it. However, when I retire in a couple of years, I'm thinking that my RMDs are going to be massive. Anything I can do now to start planning for this? So where do you start with this? Because this is a common scenario, right?
Yeah, it is. Because it's a good problem to have. Some people don't quote unquote need their RMDs. Most people do. So for some, this is not even a question or a discussion. But because people may have two substantial Social Security benefits, maybe you got a small pension, maybe you have a large pension, but then you have these pre-tax qualified accounts that you do have to start taking required minimum distributions out of. So in Paul's scenario, so he's 74, so he is of age as the rule is now. If you're born after 1960, then your RMD is going to be age 75, but he's already reached that point. So, Paul, so one way to quote unquote avoid paying RMDs is continue to work, and you can fund your 401k, because if you're currently employed by that employer who's providing your 401k, you don't have to take required minimum distributions out of it. So that would be, and you didn't mention in the question, Paul, but even if you have outside IRAs, then you would have to take RMDs out of the outside IRAs, but you could move those IRAs inside your 401k, which again would delay or put off those required minimum distributions as long as you are working. So that's one way to do it. There's also QCDs, or qualified charitable distributions. Those are to a 501c3. So if you're charitably inclined, you can give all of your RMD. You can give a portion of it, or you can give your entire RMD to a church or to a nonprofit. It's not taxable to you, but it checks the box for an RMD, and the 501c3 or the nonprofit gets your required minimum distribution. You can even start that at age 70 and a half. That even starts sooner. They have not changed the law on that. So I have clients who do that. They're charitably inclined. They don't need their RMD, so they give it to a charity.
For that first scenario around the keep working, what is kind of the tipping point to where you would feel comfortable then stopping to work and begin the RMDs? Like what is the scenario that you're working through with the client to know, okay, when can I actually stop working and transition over to retirement and then begin taking these RMDs?
Yeah, so I definitely tell people don't continue to work just to avoid RMDs, because there's a day of reckoning sometime. Some people work their entire lives, and that's okay because that's a choice. Maybe they want to, especially if someone has I think you said $1 million 401k. So that's a good chunk of money, and I'm sure Paul's got a pretty good Social Security benefit. If he's continued to work, he's paid in 35 years at least. That's how they factor in Social Security. You have to have 10 years at least paid in, but they factor in your 35 highest years to do the calculation. So if he's still working now at age 74, he's probably got a really good Social Security benefit, probably $4,000 to $5,000 a month, if I'm guessing, because I've done a lot of Social Security planning, and that's probably about the benefit. Obviously, it depends on how much you paid into the system. So going back to your question, don't continue to delay it, because if you never get around to taking RMDs, then whoever your beneficiaries are, they eventually will. So, Paul, I don't know if you're married. I don't think you asked that or mentioned that in the question, but let's say you are, then the money goes to your spouse. If you're not, then it goes down a generation. So that's an inherited IRA. An inherited IRA, the 10-year rule applies. So your beneficiaries will have to withdraw that money within a 10-year time span of them receiving that money. So the tax bill will then be put on them. So there's a tax burden somewhere. Don't continue to work, Paul, if that's the case, just to avoid RMDs. You could, within the 401k, Paul, there is an option. You need to ask your plan to see if you can do Roth conversions inside of the 401k. Again, that's still a tax bill you have to pay. It goes back to pay me now, pay me later when it comes to the IRS. But you can do internal Roth conversions where once that money is in the Roth, then you don't have to take required minimum distributions on that. One thing to be careful for in that scenario, Paul, is if you don't have any Roth money, you've never had a Roth in your life, and you have now moved money to a Roth within the 401k, the 5-year rule applies. Like, you don't want to take any gains out of that Roth because it's a 5-year rule. So hopefully at age 74, maybe you have a Roth somewhere in your lifetime. So the 5-year clock started ticking then. So if you've got one, great, don't worry about it. But if you are opening a Roth inside your 401k for the first time and doing conversions, make that 5-year rule. Let that money sit for 5.
One last thought I had, Ryan, because I obviously have never been down this road with RMDs, and I know you work with them. And although you're not of age, you're very familiar with the process. Is if you're in the situation where you're still working and you aren't required to, and let's just say you had that one 401k, even with a company for a long time, and you aren't required to start pulling that money out right away because you're still working, contributing. Are you alerted of that? Are people aware of that, or do you just get to notice, hey, you're now of age to start taking your RMDs? You need to start doing that, and aren't aware. Is this something that is clear to someone and communicated to you if you don't have to start doing it right away?
So that's a great question. The custodian, wherever the money is at, is supposed to alert you to that. Now, do people get that alerts? Do they receive the alerts? Do they get the paper correspondence in the mail? So it's not a foolproof plan because if you don't take your RMD, it's a 25% penalty of the RMD amount. So if 10 grand your RMD, you got to pay $2,500 penalty on top of the RMD that you do have to take out. So RMDs get complex. I mean, especially when it comes to inherited ones. And again, in this situation, this is not an inherited one, but this is a current 401k that most people have heard of RMDs. They know something about it, but they're not sure of the ages and rules. That's probably the biggest misconception is, when do I have to start these things? So they've changed them so many times over the years, it gets confusing. Even the inherited IRA rule, if a person passed away in 2019 or before, different rules apply with the inherited IRA. If you passed away 2020 or after, there's a different set of rules. So sometimes with us in our office, we're like, okay, this is this block that goes in here. This is this group that goes in here. So sometimes it gets very confusing. And one other caveat I want to mention is, you may be like myself. Let's say I was in Paul's situation. So I own my firm, and I'm like, you know what? I should start a 401. Let's say I didn't have a 401k. I'm going to start a 401k and then put everything in there so I can avoid paying RMDs. Well, there's a little asterisk next to a business owner. So if you own 5% or more of the company, you can't do this. You can't just shove everything to an employer sponsored plan, which would be by me. I can't do that to avoid RMDs. I would still have to take required minimum distributions. If I was lower than 5%, I could do it, but it kind of prevents people from stepping around that rule. So small business owners, I'm sorry, if you're more than 5% owner, you can't just throw in a 401k plan just to avoid these things. The IRS is they thought about that already.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, obviously someone's working with you, Ryan, at Black Oak Asset Management. This is being discussed, as part of the planning process early on. But for anyone that maybe hasn't done a lot of planning, that thinks, hey, I'm going to work into my 70s, I'll worry about retirement planning to get a little bit closer to that. How far out should you start worrying about RMDs, Ryan? Is it, I'm sure it's not hey, right now is the best time possible. I'm sure that's always an answer for anything, but 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, what's a good time frame?
Yeah, yeah, you're right. There's no hard fast rule, but yeah, a lot depends on when you're going to retire. I mean, the sooner the better. I would say, just kind of spitballing it, 55 to 60 to me is a good, especially if you have a large pre-tax IRA. It's like, okay, this is if I got $1 million at age 60, good chance it's going to be 2+ million in 10, 15 years, however that looks. So that's going to be that's a pretty substantial amount. So the general rule is, it's all RMDs are a math problem. They're a calculation based off of the 1231 value at the end of the previous year when you have to take your RMD. So it's a calculation, and of course, there's RMD calculators everywhere. If you Google RMD calculator, I think the first one that pops up is Charles Schwab's RMD calculator. Great calculator. It asks you, I think, 3 or 4 bits of information. What's the 1231 value? Your date of birth, spouse's date of birth, and you put that in there and it just spits out a number. So from there, you need to at least take that out, and then you need to withhold, preferably you need to withhold your federal and state taxes. That's what we help our clients do, because sometimes they're like, well, how much do I withhold? And again, if we have our clients' tax returns from previous years, we can give them a pretty exact percentage on how much they should withhold. So that way you're receiving the net that is left over. The federal government gets theirs, the state government gets theirs, if that applies, depending on what state you're in. Because our border to the north and our border to the south, they don't have state income tax. So there's a lot of people that live there that we work with. So, but we can get pretty close to knowing what that exact percentage is going to be. That way you're receiving the net. So that's your amount you can take your income for, or however you want to. The IRS does not care what you do with it. Once you receive your RMD, now could you put that back into a taxable brokerage account and invest it? Sure, you can do that if you want to. The IRS doesn't care. You just can't put it back into a pre-tax IRA. That kind of defeats the purpose. But you can invest it, you can save it, you can do whatever that you want. You just can't put it back into an IRA.
All right, great information. Look, the RMDs are complex, as Ryan's kind of pointed out here and highlighted. There's a lot of different scenarios. So depending on what your situation is, your plan and your strategy is going to be different probably than someone else's. So you want to work with someone that has experience doing this and can help you see the full picture of your finances and your retirement. So again, go to speakwithryan.com to schedule a time to sit down and talk with Ryan and work through some of these questions you might have, and really just begin learning about what your scenario, your situation is, and your full financial picture, so you can move forward with your planning. But again, this is a good question from Paul, and if you have one for us, send it over to us. We'll try to work through it here on the show to help other people out as well along the way. But also subscribe if you haven't done that as well. Ryan, thanks for your time as always.
Absolutely.